What we do know is that we have been imagining that for a long time. And it is the reality in more places than before. It is the reality emerging everywhere, in our minds, in our hearts, in our lives. It is the reality which is denying and nullifying and dissolving anything and everything unlike itself each time we move out in this world, embodying that truth, embodying that image, embodying that love. There's one power. And so regardless of what we see or hear on the news or anywhere, remember that that one power of love emanating from you and as you dissolves and transforms everything unlike it. There's no battle to be had, only love to be embodied and shared. So there. But that's not my topic. I'm going to just go right into this. See, I want to tell you about this podium. And Betty Ann and Dick will have heard this story before. But when I was growing up in the Unitarian Universalist Church in Brattleboro, Vermont, I used to go with my father periodically. He was the program coordinator there, and he coordinated art shows and stuff happening in the office and whatever. And there was a podium very similar to this in the big sanctuary. And I was small enough that I could take my little bag of M&Ms and crawl inside it and hang out, okay? Okay, maybe the bottom shelf was lower. But I would sit in there and sort my little M&Ms by color and then decide which one to eat first until they were all gone. You know, you make a nice long game of it. And who knew that I would grow up to hang around in such places and use these all the time. So, well, this month's theme, and we are blessed with 5 weeks of December, is Namaste. And one translation of that is the light in me recognizes and honors the light in you. And sometimes said, the spirit in me recognizes and honors the spirit in you. And so we have delighted, no pun intended, in celebrating that throughout the month. As you may have noticed, there are a lot of things going on this week and next, and I just want to share a little bit of a highlight from all of them because they have some things in common. First of all, on Friday, we had what we often refer to as the winter solstice. And I will tell you some other names for it because, of course, all I have to do is, with a click of a button, research in the comfort of my own home and discover this. We have, of course, the end of the Mayan calendar. Everybody's heard a little bit about that. A 5,000-year cycle. And the idea that a new one is beginning. And there's been plenty of talk about it, so I won't go there. But how about the Japanese Shinto winter solstice? It's called Toji Taisai. And if I pronounce that wrong, someone can help me afterwards. Also in China, there is the Dongzi Festival. In the Jewish Talmud, which is the second book of that faith, there's something called Tekufat Tebet. And in pre-Christian Northern Europe, we have the Druids, and we have a celebration called Yule, which is a 12-day celebration. In all cases, these are based on different interpretations of peoples around the world regarding a time when the days became the shortest ever, and when the nights were the longest ever. The days were short and cold, and food was not as plentiful, warmth was not as plentiful because the sun was where? It had gone and hidden. All kinds of wonderful myths and stories about coaxing it back out from wherever it went, and lots of celebration, obviously, when it returned. But every one of those solstice celebrations has to do with our relationship with the sun, with the celebration, having made it through the longest night of the year and welcoming the dawn and knowing, because by the time we've lived on this planet for one cycle, we realize that it comes back and begins again. And so there's a great deal of celebration about the lengthening of days, the promise of greater warmth, the promise of more food, the promise of more freedom to move about easily and not be so focused on survival. And a whole new cycle beginning. So that's happening. And in the northern European areas where this was celebrated, another part of what was incorporated in that had to do with the necessity of slaughtering cattle and other animals so that the food that they did have was not used to keep them going for the winter, but was rather there to feed the people. So a lot of feasting took place involving a lot of meat at that time. And of course, there's so much lore about where the gift giving comes in. All of goodwill, good cheer, sharing our good with one another. And then some of these myths involve some other debauchery that has to do with either coaxing the sun out of her hiding place or just being happy, whatever the case may be. So these festivities have been carried forward to what we observe now. A lot of feasting and gift-giving and merriment. So we have that cycle. Then we have this thing that many of us were asked to pay attention to, reminded about, and invited to participate in on Saturday, which was this idea of let's start this new cycle with more intention than ever before. And why would that be? Because possibly, if it really was the end of one major age, perhaps a 5,000-year cycle, and the beginning of another, then that would suggest that we might want to intend in a more powerful way than we have in the past. So we were, many of us, invited to consider that. And some of us took place in celebrations, extra prayer and meditation, acknowledgement of some sort. I sat out in the sun with a bunch of people and got all red mostly on this side. Because whatever we were looking at was over there. But it was wonderful. And it was wonderful. So, birth 2012, Barbara Marx Hubbard and a whole host of scientists, a whole host of people into quantum science, ancient wisdom, new interpretation of spirituality, metaphysics, neuroscience, you name it. They're all saying, no matter how you look at this, that something is true about the power of our thinking, of our intention, of our feeling, of our thought, of what we put out there and what we get back. And that when we look at what's going on out there, the best way that we can influence it is to transform what's going on in here. So Birth 2012 was an agreement among 100 million or more to make the conscious choice to shift something within us, knowing that that's the best way to heal the out there. So in that agreement, there was the willingness to recognize that fighting against and moaning about and commiserating about and shouting from the rooftops and protesting isn't going to cut it anymore. There's a shift into a different way of addressing things in the world and change. And that gets closer and closer to what we've been doing here in the New Thought movement and especially in Science of Mind centers for some time, which is recognizing the creative power of thought and the responsibility, oh yes, for what takes place in our worlds being right here within each of us. And as I've said so many times before, we have physics and neuroscience and so much more biochemistry to prove it. That what happens in our bodies and the body of our affairs when we think and feel a certain way happens also around us. And so conversely, what's happening around us has a relationship to what's happening within us. So the next thing on the calendar, as you may or may not have heard, is Christmas. And I just mentioned that I was raised as a Unitarian Universalist. And we were a group of people, this is in New England, so the predominant attire was corduroy, and the predominant vehicle was either a Saab or a Volvo. And our family built this, our congregation built this new building on the top of this hugely steep hill. And boy, was it fun to get up and down in the wintertime. I guess they didn't think about that. Originally, it was a stone building in the center of town, which was called an All Souls Church. And then we moved up and created a meeting house, rebranding, of course, and sharing that with a congregation of the Jewish faith that used the building on Saturdays eventually. Anyway, we would pull out the Bible on Christmas and Easter. And otherwise, if you mentioned it too much, if you were the minister, you'd probably get asked to leave. And if you talk that way too often, it might make a lot of people uncomfortable. We were a lot of Buddhists, a lot of intellectuals, a lot of other stuff. So we did all of the trappings of getting together, of feasting and having festivals and ceremony and twinkling lights and great banquets and a wonderful music program and fundraisers and movies on the lawn and childcare, you name it. We did it all. We had all that community. And I was among those people who felt there was a little bit missing. I needed something specific to hold on to. I know Garrison Keillor says that Unitarians go to the great wherever. And so those are my roots. And when this time of year comes around, I have to tell you that what I don't want to do is say, okay, I'm obliged to talk about one particular master teacher on this day. And so I have a little resistance around that. And I probably have a little bit in other places as well. But what I want you to know is that I discover something so neat every year as I explore this a little further. And I know that at this point many of us have. Whether, now some of you have heard this before and some of you are hearing it for the first time. Whether it's true that really this birthday for this master teacher was on June 17th, according to astronomers, or whether the birthplace was in fact in Northern Europe somewhere and not in the Middle East, according to some other people, it doesn't matter. Whether 25 books were removed during the Council of Nicaea over 1,700 years ago, and they, them, those people took away the real stuff, it still doesn't matter. Because do you know that you can go over to Barnes & Noble and, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I don't know which direction you have to walk from here to get there. But you can go to Barnes & Noble, yes, behind us, and pick up your own paperback copy of the Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can get books from Elaine Pagels translating Lost Gospels from a different interpretation of Thomas. The Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Mary, yes, the Gospel of Mary. You can go get that stuff today if you want. There are two reasons why. One is because despite all of the efforts to keep it hidden or change it for whatever reason, and it just doesn't matter. The truth has a way of getting to us. What's real has a way of re-emerging again and again and again, regardless of how we might block or redirect it. So, no matter where this person was born, if this person was born, who wrote what, there's something that keeps coming through this time of year that this person just might have said. All these things and more, so shall ye do. What else? He said, I and the Father are one. It is the Father in me that doeth the works. Well, what do we say here? We in spirit, I and spirit are one. It is the Spirit in me that does the works. It's the law of cause and effect that does the work. All I have to do is let love point the way. And let law do the work. We've even gone so far in translating, by the way, we go in not just songs. We translate every time we see the word Lord, we substitute the word law and we keep reading. Because what might we want to do? Stay open and get the gift. And instead of getting caught up in the conspiracy theories about who hid it and where and why, just go for the message. There's something within us that recognizes truth. Whether it comes from Yeshua ben Joseph, whether it comes from Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, whether it comes from whomever, if it comes from your grandchild or your niece or your nephew or within you when you're in meditation, you know how to recognize truth. So one of the things about Christmas that we do in this movement is to recognize the light in each and every one of us and to celebrate it. And so many of us do solstice and Christmas. We just do it in a different way. A way that reflects how we have awakened, what we have discovered, what has found us regardless of all attempts to put it somewhere else. And by the way, this concept of mystery schools, well, perhaps it is best for us to come upon information and knowledge as we're ready for it. Because when we're ready for it, we're ready for it. And before that, we might misunderstand it. We might give it a bad rap. We might take a lot longer to get to it if we're exposed to it when we're not ready. So, who cares about that either? What's happening right now is that all this information is available and provable. Whether you're looking at ancient wisdom, you're looking at new thought, you're looking at metaphysics, you're looking at neuroscience, biology, everything, the molecules of emotion, the biology of belief. Greg Braden, our big friend Greg Braden, who is interpreting these things both scientifically and spiritually. Do you know, he suggests that in the book of Revelations there were other outcomes that aren't printed in the books that are typically circulated and taught as common Christianity. Other outcomes for this time. The same as the Mayans were saying. The same as so many others. He traveled all around and asked all those people big questions. They all said, what's next is up to you. What's next is up to us. So that's where we're really at. And of course we have the new year, right? Always an opportunity for new beginnings. In every case then, what we have are cycles. You could say, I'm going to stick with the solstice. You could say, well, none of this really made sense to me until birth 2012. That's where I'm going to hang my hat. You might say, well, I really like to do Christmas. Christmas works for me. You might say, I'm ignoring all of that and I'm waiting for New Year's, or I'm going to either go to a burning bowl or a bonfire or sit by myself or go to a big party or whatever the case may be, set my intentions and begin again. Each one of these is a cycle, offering the opportunity to begin again. And the thing about annual cycles, of course, is they're much bigger than the next moment or the next hour, or tomorrow I'm going to be different, or next week I'm going to do this, or in 2 months I'm moving there, or in 3 months I'm going to start doing that. Every year we have these cycles come around. And they really tap into something so deep within us, so primal even, about our relationship to the sun and to the earth and to whatever made us and to one another in a deeper way. And yes, if these other things have merit, and I believe they do, although that's not what I teach, what's not what we teach here, why not say, well, gee, if in fact a 5,000-year cycle in the history of humanity is ending and we're beginning a new one, just in case that's for real, how would I like that to be? Because the truth is that we have the opportunity to choose in every moment. In every moment. So there's one last thing I wanted to share with you, and this comes from Dr. Christiane Northrup, and this is about birth. Really wonderful metaphors and analogies in her teaching. She's a doctor, and she specializes in women's medicine. And one of the books that she wrote has to do with the relationship between mothers and daughters. For all of us here, though, this metaphor works especially well right now. And it also works if you are in any place in your life where what you're doing, where you've been hanging out, how you've been doing things is no longer working. This is one of those things that helps us recognize what's going on in nature already. When things fall apart, to have a party. When things fall apart, to look at what must be showing up somewhere. When things fall apart, to know that something else, this or something better, it will take its place. So the thing about this is that when you are in the womb of a chapter in your life, and of course this is the microcosm is just you, and the macrocosm is all of humanity, okay? When things aren't working, when it's time to begin, born into another chapter, another life, another place than the one you have been, she says, the cafeteria shuts down. This is what really happens when babies are ready to be born. Nourishment no longer travels so freely through that umbilical cord. There is no longer a sense of comfort and ease and everything's just rosy and I've got all my needs met and just instantaneously met and so on. Something else begins to happen. And there is a quickening. There is an imagining of a different place. There is a longing and looking and a searching and even a change in physical direction as we try to instinctively find our way to that next place, knowing nothing of what it is yet. The other thing that happens is if we try to resist that and stay where we have been, where we no longer belong, it gets toxic. Does that sound familiar? When you've overstayed in a relationship or a job or a way of life, the heat kind of gets cranked up a little bit. Because you're supposed to be born into what's next, and you are so lovingly encouraged to let go of what is no longer timely. So what then happens is this passageway through darkness, through the unknown. It is fearful at times. It can be painful, and there's a lot of pressure. Another one of my favorites, I'll mention his name again, Greg Braden in the God Code, talks a little bit about how our potentialities are triggered during this process and this part of it. Literally in the birth canal, there are trigger points on the body which activate our genetic makeup, our potential. They actually activate what we need to know and be able to do and have available to us when we arrive in that next place. This is all the perfection of spirit showing up all over, in nature, everywhere. And what happens when we get where we're going is that actually there's a party, there's a celebration. Somebody's been expecting us. Maybe they painted the room, got all kinds of nice little things, warm blankets, whatever the case may be. That there is an expectancy and a celebration on the other side where we're heading. There's no mistake about it. So it's possible to think that while we're looking at the change in the seasons, while we're looking at the possibility of the reality of this birth 2012 and everyone who's chimed in on that, while we're looking at the idea that this Western spiritual figure known as Yeshua ben Joseph or Jesus of Nazareth said that the Christ light is within each of us. Whether we're looking at that or we're simply gearing up for a new year, we have the opportunity to recognize that it's natural to be born again, and again, and again. And that's what's happening. So what we do here at this center is we actually focus on that part that involves intention. When we pray, just like the ancient Essenes taught, and that's been passed on by, I'm just going to have to bring Greg Braden in the room and pat him on the head every time I want to mention his name. We have a very, very similar method here of setting our intention, of bringing about shifts, about bringing about change, and they are recognizing the creative power of thought. They're recognizing the light that is within each one of us, recognizing that all the time we are creating and recreating our experience, whether we know it or not. And so we get together on purpose and explore that and practice it so that it's no longer happening by accident. It's happening on purpose. And our lives just get better and better and better. And not just so that we can manifest nicer things, but so that we can go out there and be better people. So that we can go out there and be present with a word of assurance and hope for a friend or a family member or a total stranger in a moment of need. We can do that. That's what we do here. So I invite you to consider all of the things on the menu at this time, and I know you'll choose the one that feels best to you. I know that you will. I know that you already have. And even if it's that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to do this thing a little differently, it will make a shift, and it'll be part of a shift that involves you and that is greater than you. So thank you for allowing me to share that with you. I know that you choose well. And I know whichever thing you choose, or if you participate in all of them, that great things await, because that's the order of things.